Welcome back to Case Closed, the channel that opens the files on the most baffling and disturbing crimes of our time. We often turn to fiction, to the pages of a gripping thriller, to experience the thrill of the chase and the chill of the unknown from a safe distance. But what happens when the author of those dark tales crosses the line? What if the mind that crafts the perfect murder on paper decides to bring that fiction to life? Today, we're unraveling a case that is both a book lover's nightmare and a detective's ultimate challenge. We're going to tell the story of a celebrated novelist, a woman at the pinnacle of the literary world, who was arrested after a pair of astute detectives discovered that a series of gruesome murders were perfect reflections of her best-selling thrillers. It's a chilling exploration of where creativity ends and criminality begins. Before we dive into this labyrinth of fiction and reality, if you are fascinated by the psychology of crime and the intricate work of the detectives who solve these impossible cases, do us a solid and hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. It ensures you won't miss a single one of our deep dives into the criminal mind. Now, turn the page, and let's begin the first chapter of a story you won't be able to put down. The city of Oakhaven was not known for its violence. A sprawling metropolis of glass towers and manicured parks, it was a city of commerce, culture, and quiet ambition. Its crimes were typically of the white-collar variety, fought in boardrooms and courtrooms, not in the shadowy back alleys of popular fiction. That all changed on a crisp October morning with the discovery of a body in the city's prestigious art museum. The victim was Julian Croft, a prominent art critic known for his scathing reviews and an ego that dwarfed the statues he so often belittled. He was found in the Renaissance Gallery, posed meticulously on a velvet bench. He was dressed in an immaculate tuxedo, a single white rose placed in his lapel. His hands were folded peacefully on his chest. It would have been an almost serene image, were it not for the fact that his throat had been slit from ear to ear with surgical precision. And then there was the proverb. Painted in crimson blood on the pristine marble floor beneath the bench were the words, Ars longa, vita brevis. Art is long, life is short. The case fell to Detective Miles Corbin and Detective Lena Petrova. They were, in many ways, a classic pairing of opposites. Corbin was a veteran of the force, a man whose weary eyes had seen the worst of humanity. He was methodical, patient, and relied on the slow, grinding process of evidence collection and witness interviews. Petrova was younger, a rising star in the department with a mind as sharp as a scalpel. She saw patterns where others saw chaos and had an intuitive grasp of the psychological nuances of a crime scene. As they stood in the silent, cavernous gallery, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood and the faint smell of floor polish, they both felt a profound sense of unease. This was not a crime of passion. It was not a robbery gone wrong. This was a performance. Theatrical, Petrova murmured, her gaze sweeping the scene. Everything is deliberate. The tuxedo, the rose, the proverb. The killer isn't just sending a message. They're staging a play. Corbin knelt, careful not to disturb the bloody script on the floor. And Julian Croft was the star, a man who made a career out of publicly eviscerating artists. Ars longa, vita brevis. It's a threat and a punchline all in one. Our killer has a flair for the dramatic and a very dark sense of humor. The initial investigation yielded few leads. Croft had a long list of enemies, a veritable who's who of the Oakhaven art scene. Artists he had ruined, gallery owners he had insulted, even former lovers he had scorned. The list was so extensive it was almost useless. The museum's security system had been mysteriously disabled for a 2-hour window during the night, a professional job that suggested a high level of technical skill. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. Days turned into a week, and the case grew colder. The media dubbed the killer the poet, and the city was gripped by a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. The murder of Julian Croft became the city's most talked-about topic, a real-life thriller playing out in their own backyard. It was Petrova who stumbled upon the connection, and she did so not in a sterile interrogation room, but in the quiet of her own apartment. She was an avid reader, and after a particularly grueling day of chasing dead-end leads, she picked up the latest novel by an author who had taken the literary world by storm, Evelyn Glass. Evelyn Glass was a phenomenon. Her debut thriller, The Crimson Proverb, published 2 years prior, had been a runaway bestseller, lauded by critics for its intricate plotting, its chillingly realistic portrayal of a serial killer's mind, and its deep, literary intelligence. She was a recluse, rarely giving interviews or making public appearances, a fact that only added to her mystique. Her author photo showed a woman with intense, dark eyes and a Mona Lisa smile, a face that hinted at a universe of secrets. As Petrova read, a cold dread began to creep up her spine. The book's antagonist, a killer known only as the Maestro, targeted individuals he deemed to be frauds in the world of arts and culture. His first victim in the novel was a pompous art critic. He was found in a museum, dressed in a tuxedo, a single white rose in his lapel, his throat slit, and beneath his body, painted in blood, were the words, Ars longa, vita brevis. Petrova dropped the book as if it were on fire. The similarities were too numerous, too specific to be a coincidence. It wasn't just a copycat crime. It was a perfect, page-for-page recreation. She immediately called Corbin, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and horror. Miles, you need to see this. I think I know where our killer is getting his ideas. The next morning, the incident room was buzzing. Copies of The Crimson Proverb were being passed around, detectives reading passages with a grim, new understanding. The book was no longer a piece of entertainment. It was a blueprint for murder. Corbin and Petrova's first order of business was to get a warrant to interview Evelyn Glass. It was a delicate situation. She was a celebrated public figure, not a suspect. They had to approach her as a potential source of information, a consultant who might be able to shed some light on the mind of a killer who was so clearly obsessed with her work. Evelyn Glass lived in a secluded, modern glass house nestled in the hills overlooking Oakhaven, a fortress of solitude that seemed designed to keep the world at bay. They were met at the door by her personal assistant, a nervous young man who ushered them into a minimalist living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. And then, Evelyn Glass herself appeared. She was even more striking in person than in her author photo. Dressed in a simple black dress, she moved with a quiet, feline grace. Her dark eyes, intelligent and unervingly perceptive, assessed them with an unnerving calm. "Detectives," she said, her voice a low, cultured contralto. "I was wondering when you might arrive." "You've been following the Croft case, Miss Glass?" Corbin asked, his tone carefully neutral. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "It would be difficult to avoid, and the artistic flourishes have not escaped my notice. I assume you are here because you've read my book." "We have," Petrova said, stepping forward. "The parallels are exact. We were hoping you might be able to offer some insight. Perhaps you've received correspondence from an overzealous fan? Someone who might have expressed a desire to bring your work to life." Evelyn gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I will tell my assistant to bring some coffee." "And no, Detective Petrova, I have not. My readers are, for the most part, a quiet and respectable lot. They send letters praising my use of foreshadowing, not manifestos outlining their plans for murder." Over the next hour, they questioned her about her research, her writing process, the inspiration for the character of the Maestro. She was a fortress of self-possession, her answers articulate, intelligent, and utterly unrevealing. She spoke of the creative process in abstract terms, of the writer's need to inhabit the minds of their characters, to understand their darkness without succumbing to it. "A writer, detective," she said, her dark eyes locking onto Petrova's, "is a kind of god. They create a world, populate it with characters, and then set in motion a series of events. They know the beginning, the middle, and the end. It is a position of absolute power." There was a chilling undertone to her words, a hint of something that made the hair on Petrova's arms stand on end. As they were leaving, Corbin paused at the door. "One last question, Ms. Glass. Where were you on the night of October 12th, the night Julian Croft was murdered?" Evelyn's smile did not waver. "I was here, detective, alone, writing. It is what I do. It is all I do." It was a perfect alibi, unprovable and unbreakable. They had left her house with nothing more than they had arrived with. A terrifying theory and a suspect who was as untouchable as she was brilliant. The detectives dug into her life, searching for any crack in her pristine facade. They found nothing. Her past was a blank slate. She had appeared on the literary scene as if from nowhere, her manuscript for the Crimson Proverb arriving at the publisher's office unsolicited and unagented. There were no old friends, no estranged family members, no digital footprint before the publication of her book. She was as much a fiction as the characters she created. The investigation was at a standstill. They had a prime person of interest, but no evidence to link her to the crime. They were trapped in a frustrating limbo, waiting for the killer to make a mistake. And then it happened. A second body was found. This time, the victim was a high-powered defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, a man famous for getting wealthy, guilty clients acquitted on technicalities. He was found in his opulent office, slumped over his mahogany desk. He had been poisoned with a rare, fast-acting neurotoxin. On his desk, placed on top of a stack of legal briefs, was a small antique scale, its two pans perfectly balanced. And scrawled on the wall behind him in black ink was a single word: Justicia. Justice. Corbin and Petrova didn't need to be told. They knew with a sickening certainty that they would find this exact scene in Evelyn Glass's second best-selling thriller, Symmetric Justice. The game had escalated. The killer was not just a copycat. They were a devoted student. And their teacher, the brilliant, enigmatic, and untouchable Evelyn Glass, was either the investigation's greatest asset or its most terrifying suspect. The line between the creator and the creation was blurring, and the detectives knew that to catch this killer, they would have to step into the dark, twisted world that Evelyn Glass had so masterfully constructed. The discovery of Marcus Thorne's body sent a fresh wave of panic through Oakhaven and a jolt of grim purpose through the investigative team. The murder was, as Corbin and Petrova had feared, a perfect echo of a pivotal scene in Evelyn Glass's second novel, Symmetric Justice. The victim in the book was a corrupt judge, poisoned with the same rare neurotoxin, found with a balance scale on his desk and the word Justicia on the wall. The killer in this new, terrifying reality was not just following the plot. They were adhering to the author's thematic obsession with a twisted, poetic form of justice. The pressure on the department, and specifically on Corbin and Petrova, was immense. The media had a new name for the killer, the author. The public was both terrified and enthralled. Sales of Evelyn Glass's books skyrocketed. She was, in a bizarre and macabre way, benefiting from the very crimes she was now central to investigating. Their second interview with Evelyn Glass took place not in the airy, sterile environment of her home, but in the grim, windowless confines of an interrogation room at the precinct. The change in venue was deliberate. Corbin and Petrova wanted to strip away her power, to remove her from her throne of glass and steel and see how she reacted under the harsh, fluorescent lights of their world. She arrived with her high-priced lawyer, a man with a shark's smile and eyes that were as cold and dead as a fish's. Evelyn, however, seemed completely unfazed. Dressed in a sharply tailored gray suit, she looked more like a visiting lecturer than a person of interest in a double homicide. "Detectives," she said, her voice betraying no hint of nerves as she sat down at the metal table. "We meet again. To what do I owe the pleasure of this formal invitation?" "2 murders, Miss Glass," Corbin began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "2 murders that are carbon copies of scenes from your novels. The odds of that being a coincidence are astronomical. So, let's dispense with the pleasantries. We believe the killer is someone who has an intimate knowledge of your work. We need to know who you might have shared your manuscripts with before publication." Evelyn exchanged a brief, unreadable glance with her lawyer before turning her attention back to Corbin. "My manuscripts are seen by my agent and my editor. Both are reputable professionals who I doubt are moonlighting as serial killers. Other than that, my work is a solitary pursuit. I do not have a writing group, if that's what you're implying." "What about a partner?" Petrova interjected, her eyes sharp and focused on Evelyn's face. Someone you might have collaborated with? Someone who helped you brainstorm these intricate murder plots? A flicker of something irritation crossed Evelyn's features. Detective Petrova, I can assure you the darkness, as you might call it, in my novels is entirely my own creation. I do not require a collaborator. The poison that killed Marcus Thorne, Petrova pressed on. It was a custom-synthesized neurotoxin, extremely difficult to procure, the kind of substance that would require a deep knowledge of organic chemistry. Did your research for symmetric justice lead you to consult with any specialists in that field? My research is conducted almost entirely through books and academic journals, Evelyn replied smoothly. I have a library that would rival a small university's. I am a firm believer in the power of the written word. One can learn to do almost anything from a book, including, I imagine, how to synthesize a neurotoxin. It was a maddeningly circular argument. Every question they asked, she deflected with a calm, intellectual superiority, using her own creative process as both a shield and a potential explanation for the killer's methods. She was, in essence, arguing that her books were so detailed, so well-researched, that any intelligent, motivated reader could use them as a manual for murder. The interrogation continued for hours, a grueling chess match of questions and deflections. They probed her past, her education, her life before she became Evelyn Glass. She and her lawyer met their inquiries with a wall of polite but firm resistance. Her past was private, they insisted, and irrelevant to the current investigation. They were getting nowhere. Evelyn was a black hole of information, her gravity so intense that not even a single ray of light could escape. As the interview wound down, Petrova, frustrated and exhausted, decided to change tactics. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. You enjoy this, don't you? She said, her eyes locked on Evelyn's. Evelyn's lawyer started to object, but she silenced him with a small, elegant gesture of her hand. Enjoy what, detective? This, Petrova said, gesturing around the stark room. The game, the attention. You've spent your life creating these perfect, intricate puzzles on the page. And now someone is solving them in the real world. It must be gratifying on some level to see your work have such a profound impact. For the first time since they had met her, Evelyn Glass looked genuinely surprised. The mask of calm detachment slipped, and Petrova saw a flash of something else in her eyes. A flicker of pride, of validation. My only wish, detective, Evelyn said, her voice a soft purr, is that my work inspires my readers to think. It seems one of them has taken that inspiration to a rather literal conclusion. She had admitted nothing, and yet, in that moment, Petrova felt a chilling certainty. Evelyn wasn't just an observer in this deadly game. She was a participant. With no confession and no new evidence, they had no choice but to let her go. As Evelyn and her lawyer swept out of the precinct, Corbin slammed his fist on the table in frustration. She's playing with us, Lena, he growled. She's sitting there, enjoying every second of this, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. She made a mistake, Miles, Petrova said, her gaze distant. She let me see her, just for a second. She's not a passive observer. She's proud of this. And pride. Pride makes people careless. Their focus now shifted to a desperate, deep dive into the identity of Evelyn Glass. If her past was a blank slate, it was a slate that someone had deliberately wiped clean. They ran her name through every database imaginable, searched for birth records, school transcripts, any trace of a life before her literary debut. They came up with nothing. Evelyn Glass was a name that had simply not existed 5 years ago. It was a painstaking, frustrating process of digital archaeology. They analyzed the metadata of her author photos, the IP addresses of the first emails sent to her publisher. The trail was cold, the tracks expertly covered. Whoever Evelyn Glass was, she was a ghost. The breakthrough came from an old-fashioned piece of detective work. Corbin, acting on a hunch, decided to look into the legal process of name changes in Oak Haven and the surrounding states. He spent days sifting through dusty court records, his eyes bleary from reading microfilm. And then he found it. A petition for a legal name change filed 6 years ago. A woman named Dr. Eleanor Vance had requested to have her name legally changed to Evelyn Glass. The name Dr. Eleanor Vance opened a floodgate of information. She had been a brilliant but controversial professor of forensic psychology at Oak Haven University. Her field of expertise was the criminal mind, specifically the study of psychopathy and narcissism. She had been a rising star in her field, known for her radical and often unsettling theories about the nature of evil. And then, 5 years ago, she had vanished. She had resigned from her position at the university abruptly, citing personal reasons. She had sold her home, emptied her bank accounts, and simply disappeared. A year later, the manuscript for the Crimson Proverb arrived at a publishing house in New York, penned by a mysterious, reclusive author named Evelyn Glass. They had found her. They had peeled back the first layer of her carefully constructed fiction. The details of her academic career were even more chilling. They found her published papers, her lecture notes. She had written extensively on the concept of the perfect crime, not as a moral failing, but as an intellectual exercise. She had argued that the truly intelligent psychopath would not be driven by messy, chaotic emotions, but by a desire for order, for aesthetic perfection. She had, in her academic work, written the psychological blueprint for the very killer they were now hunting. They also discovered a reason for her abrupt departure from the university. A scandal. She had been accused of engaging in an inappropriate and psychologically manipulative relationship with one of her graduate students, a brilliant but troubled young man named Adam Cole. Cole had been her protégé, obsessed with her work and her theories. The university had launched an internal investigation, but before it could be concluded, Adam Cole had died by suicide. And Dr. Eleanor Vance, soon to be Evelyn Glass, had disappeared. Suddenly, all the pieces began to click into place. The killer wasn't just a random fan. They were connected to Evelyn, to her past. Was it a partner, someone she had groomed to be her real-life maestro? Or was it someone else entirely, a ghost from her past, a student who had taken her dark lessons to heart? The investigation was now focused on the life and death of Adam Cole. They pulled the old case file on his suicide. It had been ruled as straightforward, a young man succumbing to depression. But looking at it now, through the lens of what they knew about his mentor, it seemed far more sinister. They interviewed Cole's old classmates, his family. They painted a picture of a young man who had fallen under the spell of a charismatic and powerful professor. He had worshipped Eleanor Vance, had adopted her cynical worldview, had become isolated from his friends and family. And then they found it. A hidden journal, discovered by Cole's sister when she was cleaning out his apartment. In it, Adam Cole wrote in obsessive detail about his relationship with Dr. Vance. He wrote about her lessons, about her belief that morality was a construct for the weak-minded. He wrote about a project they were working on together, a series of hypothetical crimes designed to be the perfect, unsolvable murders. The descriptions of these hypothetical crimes were chillingly familiar. They were the murders of the art critic and the lawyer. They were the plots of Evelyn Glass's future best-selling novels. The journal was the smoking gun they had been desperately searching for. It was proof that Evelyn Glass had not just researched these murders. She had designed them years ago with her brilliant, unstable protégé. But a crucial question remained. If Adam Cole was her partner in creating these scenarios, he couldn't be the killer. He was dead. So who was? Had Evelyn found a new apprentice? Or was there another, even more terrifying possibility? As they wrestled with this question, Petrova's phone rang. It was the forensics lab. They had finally managed to identify a faint, partial fingerprint found on the antique scale left at the Marcus Thorne crime scene. The print had been run through every database, but there had been no match. Until now, an old, archived file had finally been digitized and cross-referenced. The fingerprint belonged to Adam Cole. The revelation was a bombshell. The man who had supposedly died by suicide 5 years ago was not only alive, but he was their killer. He was the author, the man bringing his and Evelyn's dark fantasies to life. And Evelyn Glass, the celebrated novelist, had been lying to them from the very beginning. She was not just the architect of these murders. She was complicit in them. Her carefully constructed world of fiction was about to come crashing down, and the detectives knew that the third and final act of this deadly performance was about to begin. They were no longer just investigating a killer. They were hunting a ghost that Evelyn Glass had helped create. The knowledge that Adam Cole was alive and was their killer transformed the investigation. They were no longer chasing a phantom inspired by fiction. They were hunting a man of flesh and blood, a man with a past, a man inextricably linked to the woman at the center of their web, Evelyn Glass. The revelation recontextualized everything. Evelyn's calm demeanor, her intellectual games, her carefully worded deflection sit wasn't the arrogance of a brilliant author caught in a bizarre situation. It was the calculated composure of an accomplice. The immediate priority was to bring Evelyn back in. This time, there would be no polite requests, no deference to her celebrity. They arrived at her glass house with a warrant and a tactical team. The fortress of solitude had been breached. Evelyn was in her study, a vast, book-lined room that felt more like a secular cathedral than a writer's office. She was seated at her desk, her back to the door, staring out at the city lights below. She didn't turn as they entered, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. "You found him," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless statement. It wasn't a question. "We found Adam Cole's fingerprint at the Thorne murder scene," Petrova stated, her voice hard. "His suicide was a fabrication, wasn't it? A story you helped write." Evelyn turned her chair slowly, a faint, melancholic smile on her lips. The game was over and she seemed to know it. The defiance was gone, replaced by a kind of weary resignation. "A story, detective?" "Yes. Everything is a story. Adam was my most brilliant student. He understood my theories on a level no one else ever could. He saw the world as I did, a flawed narrative in need of a better author." "You helped him fake his death," Corbin accused, his voice thick with disgust. "You manipulated a university investigation, and you set a killer loose on this city." Adam was troubled. Evelyn conceded, her gaze distant. The pressure from the university, the mediocrity of the academic world. It was crushing him. He needed to disappear to be reborn. "I simply facilitated his final chapter, so to speak." "And these murders?" Petrova pressed, stepping closer to the desk. "Are they his work, or yours?" "The performance is all his," Evelyn said, a flicker of what looked like professional pride in her eyes. "He is the one on the stage. I am merely the playwright, the architect. He is bringing our shared vision to life, with a dedication that is, I must admit, rather breathtaking." Her confession was as cold and detached as her fiction. She spoke of murder as if it were a literary critique, of a killer as if he were a gifted protege. In her mind, the lines between art and life, between morality and aesthetics, had not just been blurred. They had been completely erased. She saw Adam Cole's murder spree as the ultimate realization of her work, the highest form of flattery. "Where is he, Evelyn?" Corbin demanded. "There's a third book in your series, isn't there? The final deconstruction. There's going to be another murder." Evelyn's smile returned, colder this time. "All great stories come in threes, Inspector. A trilogy is the most satisfying structure. And yes, Adam is a great admirer of structure. He would never leave the narrative unfinished." The final deconstruction was her most famous, most disturbing novel. It centered on a wealthy, reclusive tech mogul who had made his fortune by creating a vast social media network, a man who profited from the public's vanity and loneliness. In the book's climax, the killer confronts the mogul in his own high-tech smart penthouse, turning the mogul's own technology against him, trapping him in a prison of his own making before forcing him to erase his digital empire and then himself. The target was obvious: Harrison Vance, the reclusive billionaire founder of the social media giant Connectosphere. And Harrison Vance was not just a public figure. As the detectives quickly discovered through their frantic research, he was also Dr. Eleanor Vance's older brother. The puzzle was complete. This was not just a philosophical exercise in perfect crime. It was a deeply personal vendetta. They discovered a bitter history between the siblings. Harrison had inherited the family fortune, had built his empire while his brilliant but unstable sister was left to make her own way. He had disapproved of her radical academic career and had publicly disowned her after the scandal with Adam Cole. He was the final piece of Evelyn's past that she wanted to see erased. "It's about your brother, isn't it?" Petrova said, the realization dawning on her. "This whole thing, the books, Adam Cole, it's all been an elaborate, twisted revenge plot against your family, against the world you felt had wronged you." Evelyn's eyes flashed with a sudden, intense fire. "My brother is the ultimate fraud," she spat, her voice dripping with a venom that was shockingly personal. "He built an empire on the illusion of connection, while fostering nothing but isolation and narcissism. He is a parasite who profits from the emptiness of the modern soul. His deconstruction is not just a murder detective. It is a necessary act of cultural sanitation." With Evelyn in custody, the race was on to find Harrison Vance and stop Adam Cole. A tactical team was dispatched to Vance's penthouse, a gleaming technological marvel at the top of the city's tallest skyscraper. But they were too late. When they arrived, the penthouse was in lockdown. The doors were sealed, the communication systems jammed. Adam Cole was inside with his final victim. Corbin and Petrova set up a command post in the building's lobby, communicating with the tactical team, trying to find a way to breach the penthouse's formidable security. They were in a race against the narrative, trying to rewrite the ending of Evelyn Glass's final, bloody chapter. Inside the penthouse, Adam Cole was playing out the scene exactly as Evelyn had written it. He had taken control of the apartment's integrated systems, turning a home into a high-tech cage. Harrison Vance, a man used to absolute control, was now a helpless prisoner, tormented by a ghost from his sister's past. Cole, speaking to Vance through the apartment's intercom system, was a calm, articulate tormentor. He wasn't a ranting lunatic. He was a critic, deconstructing Vance's life and career with the same intellectual precision that Evelyn had taught him. He was the physical manifestation of her rage, her instrument of vengeance. "She wrote you so perfectly, Harrison," Cole's voice echoed through the penthouse. The hollow man in his castle of glass. "She knew that the only way to truly destroy you was not to kill you, but to erase you. To take away the digital legacy that is the only thing you truly care about." On a giant screen that usually displayed stock market data, Vance was forced to watch as Adam Cole, using Vance's own biometrically secured computer, began to systematically dismantle his empire, deleting servers, wiping databases, and dissolving his multi-billion-dollar corporation into digital dust. Below, the police were getting desperate. The building's engineers couldn't bypass Cole's lockdown. They were about to make the decision to use explosives to breach the door, a risky move that could endanger everyone. But Petrova had been studying the blueprints of the building, her mind racing, trying to think like the novelist, like the killer. "In the book," she said to Corbin, "how does the detective get in?" Evelyn is obsessed with structure, with literary tropes. There has to be a deus ex machina, a hidden flaw. Corbin, who had been frantically skimming a copy of the final deconstruction, found it. "An old, forgotten maintenance shaft," he said, his finger tracing a line on the page. "The one part of the perfect building that wasn't upgraded." They located the shaft on the blueprints. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Petrova and a small tactical team made their way to the roof and began the perilous descent down the dark, narrow shaft. They emerged into the penthouse's silent, darkened server room just as Adam Cole delivered his final ultimatum to Harrison Vance. "Your empire is gone, Harrison," Cole's voice echoed from the main living area. "Now it's time for the author of that empire to follow suit. A final, perfect deletion." As Petrova and her team burst into the room, they found a scene ripped directly from the pages of the book. Harrison Vance was on his knees, a gun on the floor in front of him. Standing over him was a pale, thin man with the haunted, burning eyes of a true believer. Adam Cole. He turned, unsurprised by their arrival, a small, triumphant smile on his face. He had reached his climax. The epilogue, he said softly, and raised his hands in surrender. He had no intention of escaping. His only goal was to finish the story. His arrest, his capture, was the final, satisfying sentence. The aftermath was a media frenzy. The story of the novelist who scripted real-life murders was more sensational than any fiction she could have written. Evelyn Glasser, Eleanor Vance, and Adam Cole were tried together. Throughout the trial, they showed no remorse. They were collaborators in a grand, artistic project, and in their twisted view, they had been a resounding success. They were both found guilty and sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in separate, maximum security prisons. Months later, Petrova stood in the precinct's evidence lockup, looking at a box filled with first editions of Evelyn Glass's novels. They were no longer just books. They were manifestos, blueprints, confessionals. The case had been a harrowing journey into the darkest corners of the creative mind, a place where a brilliant intellect, untethered from empathy, could justify the most monstrous of acts. She picked up the crimson proverb and opened it to a random page. The words, once so clever and entertaining, now seemed to carry a chilling weight. Evelyn Glass had sought the power of a god, the ability to create and destroy worlds with her words. In the end, she had succeeded, but the world she had created was one of real pain, real loss, and real blood. The author had written her own ending, not in ink, but in the lives she had so carelessly deconstructed. The case was closed, but for Lena Petrova, the story would never truly be over.